The crisp morning air bit into Captain Torrin Vale's lungs as he embarked on his routine patrol through the sprawling expanse of the High Ridge Forest. The sun lingered just below the horizon, its first tentative rays stretching long, jagged shadows across the towering evergreens that loomed like silent sentinels. His boots pressed into the forest floor with a muted crunch, stirring a carpet of fallen leaves, brittle twigs, and a delicate sheen of frost that shimmered faintly in the pre-dawn gloom. This remote stretch of the military outpost hugged the edge of a vast, untamed wilderness, rendering it an essential artery in the perimeter security routine. Torrin had walked this path more times than he could count over his years stationed here, his senses attuned to its rhythms. The whisper of wind through pine needles, the distant call of a hawk, the earthy tang of moss and soil. Yet today, the forest felt different, as if it held its breath, waiting. The familiar scent of pine mingled with an elusive tension that prickled at the edges of his awareness. He adjusted the straps of his backpack, heavy with standard patrol gear, flashlight, first aid kit, extra rations, a coiled rope, and emergency supplies he'd learned never to venture without. His sharp, hazel eyes scanned the surroundings, catching the subtle shifts in light and shadow as dawn crept closer. Not far into his journey, a quiet unease settled over him. The usual morning chorus of birds, warblers, finches, the occasional thrush, was conspicuously absent. Where the woods typically buzzed with life, a strange, unnatural hush prevailed, as if the forest itself had recoiled from some unseen disturbance. Years of military training had sharpened his instincts to a razor's edge, and now they hummed with a warning he couldn't ignore. Stay alert. Venturing deeper, the signs grew more pronounced, each one a breadcrumb in a trail of disquiet. Fresh tracks marred the damp earth, starkly different from the deer trails or fox prints he'd grown accustomed to. Large patches of mud lay churned and disturbed, as though something or someone had moved through with purpose in the night. Broken branches littered his path, some snapped clean, their jagged ends still weeping sap in slow, amber tears. These weren't the casual traces of foraging wildlife. They carried a deliberate weight, a human imprint. Torrin slowed his stride, his hand brushing the GPS unit clipped to his belt as he marked the coordinates with meticulous care. The morning mist hung low, curling around the tree trunks like ghostly tendrils, softening edges and cloaking the distance in a silvery haze. The atmosphere thickened, pressing against him as he pressed on. More anomalies emerged, each one sharpening his focus. A frayed length of rope dangled from a low branch, its fibers weathered but intact, swaying faintly in the still air. Nearby, half buried beneath a scatter of leaves, he spotted food wrappers, crumpled foil and plastic, their sheen suggesting recent use. The silence deepened, wrapping around him like a second skin as he moved farther from the main patrol circuit. Even the wind seemed to falter, leaving an unsettling stillness that set the hairs on his neck bristling. Then, a sight stopped him cold. A clear trail of massive paw prints etched deep into the mud, their edges crisp and fresh, running alongside what appeared to be boot prints. Human, unmistakable, and numerous. These weren't ordinary tracks. The soil bore deep gouges and ruts, as if something heavy had been dragged against its will. His military training snapped into gear, and he crouched low, studying the scene with a methodical eye. The signs pointed to recent activity within a day or two, judging by the mud's dampness and the lack of weathering. The boot prints varied in size and tread, suggesting at least 3 individuals, their paths overlapping in a chaotic tangle. But it was the animal tracks that gnawed at him. Too large for a coyote, too broad for a wolf, and far beyond anything he'd encountered in these woods. The morning light strengthened, filtering through the dense canopy in slivers of gold. Yet it seemed to cast more shadows than it dispelled, pooling in the hollows and crevices around him. Torrin reached for his radio, thumbing the button to confirm a steady signal with base command. The forest's oppressive quiet pressed harder, a living thing in its own right, and he knew something profound had fractured its natural order. Following the trail of disruption, the evidence of human presence multiplied, each discovery tightening the knot in his gut. More branches lay snapped and strewn, their green innards exposed to the air. The undergrowth bore the scars of heavy passage, trampled ferns, crushed saplings, and faint tire tracks half hidden beneath a shroud of fallen leaves and pine needles. His pace slowed further as the path veered into a denser thicket, a rugged swath of forest rarely included in standard patrols due to its steep inclines and tangled roots. The mist began to lift, peeling back in wispy layers, but the silence clung stubbornly, unbroken by the rustle of squirrels or the dart of a rabbit. Torin paused beside a gnarled pine, unscrewing his water bottle for a quick sip, his senses still razor-sharp. By now, the forest should have awakened. Birds returning to their branches, small creatures resuming their scurry. Yet it remained a void, as if something had driven its inhabitants into hiding. Whatever it was, it carried a weight serious enough to silence the wild. Deeper into this unfamiliar terrain, a sound pierced the stillness, faint at first but growing clearer with each step. It wasn't the soft shuffle of leaves or the patter of a foraging critter. It was heavier, mournful, a low resonance that seemed to ripple through the trees like a distant echo. The noise defied his years of forest patrols, blending a whimper with a labored breath, tugging at his curiosity and caution in equal measure. Drawn forward, he moved with deliberate stealth through the thick underbrush, pushing aside thorny vines and ducking beneath low-hanging boughs. The mist had thinned to a ghostly veil, but dark clouds gathered overhead, their edges bruised with the promise of rain. The air grew dense, mirroring the tension coiling in his chest like a taut spring. The sound swelled, guiding him toward a small clearing carved out of the wilderness. Torin halted at the clearing's edge, his breath catching sharp and sudden in his throat. There, tethered to a massive oak at the heart of the space, stood an adult brown bear. The sight struck him like a physical blow, so alien, so fundamentally wrong, that for a fleeting moment he questioned his own eyes. But as he blinked against the dim light, the grim reality solidified, twisting his stomach with a volatile mix of shock and outrage. The bear was bound tight with a web of heavy chains and ropes, looped repeatedly around its broad frame and the tree's gnarled trunk. Despite its formidable size, easily 7 feet tall when standing, and the raw power it must possess, the animal didn't thrash or roar. Instead, it slumped partially on its side, its enormous head resting on the churned earth, matted fur rising and falling with each shallow breath. Its deep brown eyes, startlingly alert despite its weariness, fixed on Torin with an expression that cut through the haze, an exhaustion laced with something deeper, something almost sentient. Raindrops began to fall, soft and tentative, filtering through the canopy to speckle the ground with dark spots, lending a somber sheen to the scene. Torin conducted a meticulous visual sweep, his soldier's training kicking in as he catalogued every detail. The bear's fur was a tangled mess, clumped with dirt and grime, a testament to prolonged captivity. Around its thick neck, a crude metal collar had worn away patches of fur, exposing raw, chafed skin that glistened faintly with moisture. The ground beneath the tree was a battlefield of torn soil and uprooted grass, claw marks radiating outward, evidence of a struggle long since surrendered. What struck him most wasn't the bear's physical state, dire as it was, but its behavior. For a wild creature trapped in such torment, it showed no bared teeth, no snarling defiance as he edged closer. Only a quiet, resigned awareness that seemed to weigh the air between them. The rain steadied into a gentle patter, drumming against the leaves above, but the bear barely registered it, its gaze locked on Torin with unwavering intensity. The scene felt surreal, framed by the gloomy light and the rhythmic drip of water, a stark contrast to the gravity unfolding before him. More details emerged. Scattered food containers littered the clearing's edge, tin cans and plastic tubs, their contents long gone, suggesting someone had been feeding the bear with regularity. This wasn't a random act of cruelty but a calculated, sustained effort, chilling in its precision. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, a low growl that rolled across the treetops as Torin widened his survey. The bear's breathing was labored but rhythmic, its massive chest heaving in a steady cadence that held an almost hypnotic quality. Despite its dire straits, there was a dignity in its posture, a resilience that hinted at an intelligence beyond mere instinct, a quiet strength that refused to be fully extinguished. The rain soaked through his uniform, plastering the fabric to his skin, but Torrens scarcely noticed, his focus riveted on the bear and the mystery it embodied. Questions raced through his mind, each more unsettling than the last. Who would chain a creature like this? Why here, so perilously close to a military outpost? How long had this magnificent animal suffered in silence, concealed just beyond the reach of routine patrols? As another peal of thunder echoed through the forest, the bear lifted its head slightly, its gaze drifting past him into the shadowed woods beyond. The motion revealed more, patches of scarred skin visible beneath its sodden fur, a map of abuse etched across its body, telling a story of prolonged neglect and torment. Torrens felt a pang of connection, a visceral recognition of its suffering that stirred memories of the service animals he'd once tended, dogs rescued from combat zones, their eyes carrying the same blend of trauma and endurance. He knew he had to document it all before acting, preserving the scene with the clarity his training demanded. Moving with deliberate slowness to avoid startling the bear, he slipped his phone from his pocket and began snapping photos through the easing drizzle. The images captured the stark reality. The bear's matted coat, the raw wounds, the heavy restraints biting into the oak's bark. Up close, its condition was worse than he'd feared. Where a healthy bear's fur would gleam thick and glossy, this one's was patchy and dull, stripped bare in swathes around its shoulders and neck where the collar had scoured it raw. The collar itself was a brutal artifact, industrial-grade metal crudely welded, its surface speckled with rust that hinted at months, perhaps years, of unrelenting wear. The shipping chains binding it to the tree had carved deep grooves into the bark, some links shinier than others, suggesting periodic replacement by its captors, a grim sign of ongoing maintenance. Torrens' medical training kicked in, cataloging the bear's injuries with clinical precision. It was severely undernourished, its once powerful frame hollowed out, muscle wasting beneath the matted fur. Through the gaps, he could see ribs protruding faintly, though someone had provided just enough sustenance to keep it alive. Old wounds crisscrossed its body, healed poorly into jagged scars that spoke of past violence. Its paws were a mess, swollen and infected from standing in the damp, unyielding earth, claws overgrown and splintered from futile attempts to claw free in the early days of its captivity. Dark stains ringed the tree's base, where rain had mingled with blood over time, pooling in the churned soil like a silent accusation. A closer sweep of the area unveiled more evidence of methodical cruelty. Hidden beneath a layer of leaves and debris, Torrens found empty food cans and water jugs, all the same brand, their consistency suggesting a rigid feeding routine. Some labels were faded and peeling, others crisp and new, sketching a timeline of the bear's imprisonment that stretched back months, perhaps longer. The ground formed a stark circle of bare earth around the tree, marking the limit of its reach, a boundary beyond which the forest remained pristine, a poignant divide between captivity and freedom. Tufts of the bear's fur clung to low branches and snagged in the undergrowth, silent testaments to its struggles. Then, a discovery froze his blood. Partially concealed beneath the litter, he unearthed small, weathered scraps of paper, torn bedding slips, their ink smudged but legible. This wasn't just confinement. It was exploitation, an illegal wildlife fighting operation, with this noble creature as its unwilling pawn. The thought clenched his jaw with a fury he struggled to contain. The bear watched him throughout, its deep eyes tracking his every move with an unsettling awareness. Despite its suffering, it maintained a remarkable calm, its breathing steady though strained, occasionally shifting to rattle the chains in a haunting metallic lament. Fresh boot prints in the mud, multiple sets fanning out from the tree, confirmed recent visitors, likely within the last day, their outlines softened by the rain but clear enough to photograph. Following the most distinct trail, Torrens traced a concealed path through the dense undergrowth, a narrow, winding track, carefully hidden from casual eyes. It led him 200 yards to another clearing, where a trafficker's camp crouched beneath a camouflage tarp stretched taut between trees, designed to evade aerial detection. Though recently deserted, It bore the scars of prolonged activity. A metal fire pit held fresh ashes, still faintly warm signs of a hurried exodus, perhaps triggered by his approach. The remnants painted a chilling portrait of organized wildlife trafficking. Beneath the tarp, Torin found a weatherproof container brimming with documents. His hands trembled faintly as he sifted through file folders. Photographs of the bear in healthier days, perhaps performing in a traveling circus, followed by a grim chronicle of its decline, images of it forced into combat with other animals. Each photo was dated, labeled with sums of money, a systematic betting racket laid bare. A leather-bound notebook detailed the operation in multiple hands. Lists of dates, locations, and payments, sketching a sprawling criminal network. The bear was but one thread. Records named tigers, wolves, smaller bears, their current locations marked with red XS on a folded map spanning the region. Veterinary supplies littered the site, sedatives, antibiotics, hinting at a medic's involvement. Training gear, twisted with cruel modifications, and coiled chains like those binding the bear lay half-buried in leaves, poised for future victims. A series of notebooks revealed the operation's scope. Coded entries of transport routes, contact lists, and payment logs, some dated mere days ago, others stretching back months. This network spanned states, possibly continents. Most troubling were recent photos of other bears, marked for capture, an active expansion targeting new prey. Detailed plans outlined hidden holding pens throughout the forest, complete with specifications for securing large animals. Sophisticated comms gear, radios, signal jammers, suggested lookouts, and an early warning system, explaining the camp's hasty abandonment. In a separate waterproof case, medical records tracked the bear's abuse with cold detachment, weight loss, injury recovery, profit margins scribbled in margins, reducing it to inventory. Hidden among the papers were ties to broader crimes. Coded business cards and contacts hinted at international gambling rings and protected species trafficking. Rain intensified, drumming against the tarp as Torin photographed the camp, urgency mounting to preserve evidence before it washed away. Returning to the bear, he approached with renewed purpose, his past with traumatized animals guiding his steps. Its wise eyes followed him, steady despite the downpour, stirring memories of combat dogs he'd rehabilitated, scarred, yet enduring. Speaking in a low, steady tone, he watched its ears twitch, head lifting faintly, a fragile trust budding. Sitting at a safe distance, he shared tales of those dogs, of resilience forged in despair. The bear's breathing softened, a bond forming amid the rain's steady cadence. Their connection deepened over time. The bear's gaze held an intelligence beyond instinct, reading his intent with a clarity that bridged species. Time slowed as they faced each other. Its head tilted curiously, blinking slowly at his voice, a sign of comfort Torin recognized from his work. Thunder rolled, yet it remained calm, drawing strength from his presence. It glanced at its chains, then back, a silent plea shimmering in its eyes. Torin saw his own scars reflected. Combat's toll, the struggle to trust anew. As morning stretched into midday, the bear's posture softened, muscles easing despite its bonds. It showed no wild tension, a breakthrough echoing his past rescues. Radioing base command, Torin reported the scene with a steady voice, sparking an immediate response. Wildlife experts, vets, and law enforcement mobilized. Rain worsened, but he stayed, guarding their trust. Soon, the clearing hummed with activity. Dr. Lisa Vorn, a large animal rescue veteran, led the vet team, her expert eyes assessing the bear's state and the tangled restraints. It tensed at the newcomers, but Torin's presence steadied it. Thunder boomed as they prepared, a mild sedative kept it calm yet mobile, vital for the rugged terrain. Removing the chains was a grueling task. Rust and bark fused them tight, rain slicking the tools. Torin stayed by its head, whispering reassurance, its eyes seeking him amid the clamor. After hours of painstaking work, the last chain fell with a heavy thud, the collar clattering free. The team held their breath. The bear rose slowly, trembling but unaggressive, testing its liberty with tentative steps. Dr. Vorn laid a food trail to a transport cage. It needed urgent care. Torin stepped back, granting it choice. Its gait steadied, the team guiding without crowding. Rain eased as it entered the cage, a nod from nature. The journey to Havenwood Sanctuary, 50 miles off, spanned stormy hours. Torin followed, bound to the bare heat connected with. X-rays there revealed old fractures, but its resilience shone, no organ damage, a calm aiding recovery. Torin visited weekly, watching it, named Kale for its endurance transform. Its coat regained luster, scars fading. Kale perked at his arrivals, a quiet joy in its eyes. The trafficking probe, fueled by Torin's evidence, netted arrests and rescues, spotlighting wildlife crime. Months later, Kale splashed in a pool, a far cry from its chained past. The outpost bolstered patrols, training staff to spot trafficking. Kale thrived in Sanctuary, never wild again but content, watching sunrises from a rocky perch. On Torin's last visit before transfer, Kale pressed its nose to the barrier, fear gone, spirit restored. Its tail rippled outward, a testament to nature's grit and human compassion, urging stewardship of the wild.